listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft and people who play it. Today is October 11th, 2022, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to our podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, how are you doing this fine Tuesday?
Spencer, hello. We are recording on a Tuesday for the first time in quite a few weeks, which is weird. It's weird that is weird, but here we are. We got kind of a quiet week in game this week coming up, but we got a lot of stuff to talk about what's coming up in the game.
Yes. Yeah, there's not a ton happening in the live experience at the moment. However, Dragonflight is popping off. I threw out a tweet just before we started up stream for this episode, which we always do live. In case people want to tune in live, they can at twitch.tv/thestartingzone or over on our Twitter at YouTube, at youtube.com/thestartingzone. Or, of course, you're listening to the podcast. It's obviously available on all the audio platforms. But yes, that was representing a giveaway that we're doing. And so part of the upcoming stuff that's happening with Dragonflight is also beta experience for those who are searching for beta keys, access to get in there and try out some of this fun stuff before it all kicks off in, I guess just a little over a month now. You can get access to one of those. So you check out the tweet. We'll be mentioning a particular keyword after sort of the news segment of this episode, the primary segment of this episode for what's going on this week, before we dive into those blue posts. And with that keyword, you can reply to that tweet, follow the Twitter, like the tweet, and we will enter you into Get a Key, which I think we're handing out tomorrow or something. We're handing out pretty soon, like tomorrow or Thursday.
Yeah, it's going to be tomorrow, I think. And thanks to our friends on the Warcraft team for providing those to us to distribute to you. Beta's fun. I think it's a good time to jump into beta now because everything's pretty much there. Everything's playable. Mythic Plus testing is available as of this week. I think we got normal mode raid testing coming up this coming weekend, I want to say. There's stuff to do, and you could do the level up experience where you can make a max level character and do PvP or dungeons or whatever. So it's not like sort of the early days of when public testing starts and it's like, well, there's, a couple different things you can do. We're getting close and beta's really rounding into form. So if you haven't had a chance to jump in yet, this is a cool opportunity for our audience to, get in there and play some beta before Dragonflight comes out.
Exactly. All right. Before we dive into the World of Warcraft stuff, we like to do these updates on, ABK and what's been going on in that realm. So people are still aware of what's happening with the employees who actually make the games that we love. And Jason, what's our update for this week?
Yeah, we haven't had one in a long time because things have been kind of quiet. Things have sort of moved into the realm of, legal proceedings and contract negotiations and stuff. And the big news this past week, you may remember recently that Raven QA successfully voted to unionize. Yeah. And Activision Blizzard wasn't thrilled about that. They tried to stop them from being able to. They said they didn't have standing to be able to. The NLRB approved it. The QA department is 20-some people, 30-some people out of the whole, the company. So the Raven was saying, well, they don't have enough. They don't represent enough of the company. And the NLRB said, no, that's fine. So now they're in the contract negotiation phase. And the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board in the U.S., said that Activision withheld pay raises from Raven Software QA staff because of their union organizing activity, which is not a thing you can do. We actually do have labor laws in the U.S., and employees are legally allowed to unionize and organize, and employers cannot retaliate against them or treat them differently than non-unionized employees as a result. These things get ignored in practice, and they're rarely enforced. So it's nice to see the NLRB kind of weigh in on these contract negotiations and stuff. And basically what happened was they gave non-union Raven staff some benefits and pay raises that they weren't offering the unionized QA. That's not cool. That's typical union busting nonsense that these big employers love to do. So a little bit of ammunition for the Raven QA union's case, and wish them the best in their contract negotiations.
Yeah, no, I think you said it all pretty well there. There's not a whole lot else that I feel that's different from what you said. So it's pretty bad behavior. Anyways.
Would you expect anything less from Activision Blizzard Corporate? I wouldn't.
Yeah, it's true. All right, moving into World of Warcraft. This past week for us was a pretty quick raid week. We just did the Fated stuff. We didn't actually go back and do any of the non-Fated stuff. There was a plan to do it, but with Thanksgiving happening for all of us Canadians out there, it made for a difficult week with people traveling and people having plans on some of our raid nights. So we ended up just doing the regular sort of Fated experience, which went fine. We actually killed Denathrius, which was great. So that's finally happened. It only took like a month and a half or whatever it's been, 2 months, something.
Yeah, it's been more than 2 months now because it was the first week of August. Yeah,
that's right. So, that happened. Obviously, we'll be moving into fully Fated stuff. So that'll mean that all of those easy to get mounts are now kind of going away. You'll now have to kill all the Fated bosses to get those things. So that's something that people need to bear in mind for sure. But outside of that, World of Warcraft for me has been kind of a slow burn because there just isn't a lot going on in live game. But what about you?
Well, it was a little bit of a lighter week for me as well. But so one thing, you said you did Fated Denathrius.
Yeah.
Like we breezed through Heroic Nathria last week. I wasn't even going to start the week with it, but then I had a lot of people out or late on Tuesday, and I'm like, let's just start killing bosses. We ended up plowing through. And then Denathrius, we had such a weird experience because Protoform Barrier, which is my favorite Fated affix. I'm like, Denathrius is going to be super easy this week, except if you do like any kind of damage to Heroic Fated Denathrius, then Protoform Barrier pushes him to phase 2 before you can get enough of your debuff stacks off of. You only get like 2 Cleansing Pain casts if you're doing full out damage to him in phase 1. So we had to really kind of orchestrate the dance in phase 1 in order to clear it. And then as soon as we did that, we just kind of smashed through phases 2 and 3 because as soon as a barrier would pop, everything would just die. That was weird. It kind of just speaks to how much I dislike the design of the Denathrius fight, especially phase 1.
Well, it speaks to the
fight. You have
those
whole DPS, phases.
Yeah, it speaks to the fight not being designed for Fated affixes, right? Like that, it's just right off the bat is just like, well, this is not what the fight was in. Like they did not consider this when they were designing the initial fight. If Fated affixes were something that they planned on doing later in the expansion, I think you would have seen them be like, what's this going to look like when it's Fated? But I very much think that this was like end of season 2, sometime during season 3, them going, hey, we have this idea of something we could do. What would this be like? And didn't really consider, which is why we saw lots of stuff with the time-based things that mess around with debuffs being really janky and having to get nerfed left, right, and center, right? Is that none of the fights were designed around it. So I think hopefully they've learned their lesson, where if they're going to consider doing affixes like this, similarly to what they do with Mythic Plus, where they design those dungeons around them being Mythic Plus dungeons, as opposed to designing them as, hey, well, this is just like a fun experience. What happens when we throw all of these random things that we never thought about into them, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and Denathrius always had the problem, even when it was like current endgame content of like the phase 1 dance of like how much damage can we do and when do we have to do it. 3 people
just not doing damage, like just like you have all your druids just sit in bear form and dance while the first phase takes place, like
right, like those are just not what we want to do as players. So that was Tuesday. Wednesday we started up finally doing Sepulchre achievements on normal non-fated, which was kind of comical. It felt like sub LFR type of difficulty on the fights with being that far removed, right? We're all geared up in season 4 now in heroic plus loot 300-ish item level, and then you're going into what even was normal Sepulchre like 252, I think. So you got like 50 item levels on the stuff that you're fighting. It kind of just falls over. And most of the ones we did, I think, were decently fun. Like they weren't too bad. There's kind of your typical implementations of like pull this ad in the hallway into the room to fight the boss with, or something like that. Have one player manage this clickable item, stuff like that. So it was okay. There was a cool one, actually. The one I liked the best, we did everything up through Halandris so far. I mean, the raid is just so big, and, achievements are a little bit weird to work out. There was just no way we were doing all 12 of them in one night. But the one for Lahuvim, where you have to have somebody get Reeves out, and then you use Reeves to, like, make a new kind of ad for the ads that he makes, that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But, overall, I haven't found them to be too odious. The only thing that we ran into that we had a problem with was on the council fight. You have to like click that paw print that's on the left side of the room, and then the corgis come in during the stampedes, and you have to click everybody's got to get
everyone
5
has the right amount.
Everybody in the raid.
Yep.
So a couple caveats with that is that on normal mode, it takes like forever for her to start doing the stampede spell. I thought it was bugged. At first I was like, well, maybe she doesn't do this on normal. Maybe we can't do this on normal. And then finally, after like several ability rotations, she did it. I'm like, it's like she's skipping one. Like there's some kind of bug with the ability timing. And then we found out that somebody was AFK while we were zoning into the room. And so they couldn't see your pet corgis. Ergo, we could not do the achievement until we wiped and reset everything and got everybody in the room to click the paw print. So I like the concept of that achievement, but in practice, it was the most logistically challenging for us to actually do. So.
I just wish it was heavily individual in the sense that, like, you know what? As opposed to having to wait for everyone to click this thing, if someone misses it, they miss it, and you can get another time. Like, it's just, as it was. It felt very much to us like, this is the one time we're doing it. We're not going to do this again. Everyone needs to get this. Oh, did we screw up? Okay, everyone wipe. And you're like, oh.
Right.
Yeah, I do enjoy when there's, you know what, if someone during another re-clear 1 week wants to click the paw thing and do that during the fight, that's fine. They can do it. It's no problem. But the issue is you will tear through that fight so quickly, they will never get 5 corgis in the period of time. Like, no,
it's not possible anymore. Yeah, you have to do it on purpose. Yeah,
you have to wait for everyone to get them. So it's just very much, I guess it's doing something silly and fun in raid, which is fine. But I do wish that it was like 2 stacks or something like that. So it was one of those, you can get it faster, everyone can get it faster, or if you were just doing a normal clear, someone could actually go off and do it on their own and get it done. Or say, hold up for just 1 second, I just need to click one more kind of thing, and everyone could, pause for a sec. Like that I would appreciate more. But 5 is like, I think we were waiting around for, I think it was 4 minutes of us just sitting there waiting for everyone to click everything. It was ridiculous how long we sat in that phase like that.
Yeah, it's like, it was longer than doing the entire rest of the fight. We're just waiting in phase 2 for the corgis to spawn and for people to click them.
And in that phase, you have AoE damage happening to everyone that gets progressively worse. So, like, as a healer in that, like, by the end of it, we're, like, blowing major cooldowns to keep the raid alive as we're just hoping someone clicks things so that we can actually move on to that phase. Yeah, it was interesting. That was an interesting achievement, for sure.
I wish I had known a couple of these things about it before we had made the initial poll, because if I had realized that, like, just clicking the thing does nothing if anybody is not in range, then we would have just waited for the person that was out of range to get into range, But I didn't know that, and any Wowhead comments or whatever I happened to see didn't specify. So that was like a huge waste of time on that attempt. But overall, like, I enjoyed these so far, but now we have the last 4 bosses, so Anduin on. So we'll see if we can get them done this week.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, let's hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft. All right, I know you're all thrilled that the Pet Battle bonus event is back again. No, it's not. It's not the most exciting one, but for those who are interested, the Sign of the Critter buff is up, increasing Pet Battle experience gain by 200%. And there's, of course, the quest you can pick up inside Oribos to win 5 PvP Pet Battles. That gets you an Ultimate Pet Battle Training Stone, which instantly max levels a pet. It's, it is what it is. Anyways, if you enjoy pet battling, get out there, do some pet battles, level up some pets. It's an incredibly, ridiculously huge buff to their experience, and you'll get done very quickly. So if that's something you want to do, hop in and do that. All right. Oribos quests. You got your weekly Zereth Mortis quest, a new deal to pick up. You got patterns within patterns to pick up. And then, of course, the arena quests the PvP quests for arenas and epic battlegrounds. Those are still going on. So be sure you pick up the Arenas and Epic Battlegrounds quests if you're trying to max out some, honor and get some more rewards before the season rolls to an end here. PvP Brawl is Deepwind Dunk. This is Deepwind Gorge, but, with Dunk Ball basically incorporated into it. It's just a better version of Deepwind Dunk, really. It's cool. It's fun. It's wacky. It's certainly worth checking out if you're someone who enjoys some PvP. Queue up for a Deepwind Dunk. You'll get yourself the Something Different quest, which is some Marks of Honor, Conquest, and Honor. And you can have some fun playing the basketball in the Deepwind Gorge.
Yeah, you're right. It's like the better version of Deepwind Gorge, in my opinion. Yeah. I think this is a great brawl. So, if you've never done it before, I highly recommend this one because it's very like kind of fast paced, and the objective that it adds on top of the map is really fun. So, and just flavorful. It's like basketball inspired, but it reminds me of like American Gladiators. They used to play a game on American Gladiators that was like this back, in my youth. So yeah, it's cool. If you want to do some brawling, you could do a lot worse than Deepwind Dunk.
Yeah, actually, I forgot about that, and then you mentioned it. And now I have all these flashbacks of people in like spandex overalls running down a course trying to slam a ball into like a teeter-totter thing. Yeah,
with the foam padded helmets on. And,
yes.
Yeah, and it's just like some accountant or something, and he's like trying to score the ball, and there's like bodybuilders lifting him over his head.
Yes, that is American Gladiators. All right. Anyways, world bosses for this week. We got Mortanus up. That's the big bone construct in Maldraxxus. Which memories does he drop for those who are still curious about collecting all those things?
So for Mortanus, you got rogues, warriors, and monks. Want to make sure you got your memories from this world boss. You got Guile Charm for rogues, Vegeta for warriors, and Kiefer for monks. So keep an eye out on that. If you don't have all your memories, don't forget about Mortanus.
Yeah. Morgeth, the Tormentor of the Damned, is the fated boss for the week, meaning that they drop increased eye level rewards. So your cloth wrists and legs, leather hands and waist, mail hands and feet, plate, waist, and legs, and a mastery trinket with a main stat proc. All those scaled up to that fated eye level. So something that's worth checking out if you're interested in that. And then, of course, Antros.
And that means, too, you can take them to the Catalyst.
Yes.
They can go to the Creation Catalyst since they're fated. So, those are all spots you can get, couple tier slot. Yeah, for, I think for everybody. Every armor class can get a tier piece from this boss. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then, of course, Antros, the big Guardian construct in Zereth Mortis, is worth 20% towards your Patterns of the Patterns quest, so certainly worth killing him off every week. Mythic Plus affixes for the week are Tyrannical, Bursting, and Volcanic, meaning bosses have 30% more health, and them and their minions inflict 15% increased damage. When slain, non-boss enemies explode, causing damage over time to players, and this affects stacks. And while in combat, enemies periodically cause gouts of flame to erupt beneath the feet of distant players. So, interesting. So, Tyrannical's Tyrannical. We can just, set that aside, because everyone knows what Tyrannical is and what it means when it comes to bosses are going to be healthier, they're going to live longer, they're going to hurt more. Bursting, always an interesting affix to run into, because it can roll out of control so quickly, and it's one of the most how much can you handle kind of affixes that's out there when it comes to, hey, do we have cooldowns up? Do we have survivability abilities up? Can we pull this pack into that other pack and kill all of them at the same time in one big AoE fest and get a ton of bursting stacks, and everyone hits their buttons and we're all fine? Or is it more of, one of those, hey, we have to pull this dungeon a lot slower because we don't want to get above 4 or 5 stacks because then things start to spiral out of control, and slow and steady wins the race when it comes to bursting. It all depends on, obviously, the height of the key that you're doing, the challenge that you're up for, and the group that you're running with. So just be aware of what bursting means when it comes to pulling slower, faster, or specifically targeting down one particular mob and then targeting something with a lot of health so that you bring it low while that debuff falls off from the mob that just died. That sort of thing, just sort of getting your rhythm and your pacing down for DPS. Volcanic's Volcanic. I mean, you're going to see gouts of flame appear on the ground. You're going to want to move out of them. They're going to knock you up in the air and disrupt you. And there are definitely bosses out there that, especially on Tyrannical, will take advantage of the fact that you can't move because you're knocked up into the air and destroy you. So that'll be frontals or zones on the ground, whatever it is that you can't move out of because you got knocked up into the air. Be careful, obviously, with any kind of thing that overlays the ground that prevents you from being able to see where the gouts of flame might be coming from. There have been many things over the years, from Carpets in Karazhan to in Legion, there was the High Mountain dungeon that had water in it. It would always spawn under the water and hit you. There's just all sorts of things. So
Gambit, Soleil's Gambit's the same way.
Yeah.
In the front area, you're in like Stormheim, and you fight all those Murloc packs, and you're in the water, and it's really hard to see volcanics and like the mini boss Swirly and all that stuff. So Volcanic can be kind of a little bit worse in some dungeons versus others because of things like that. And Karazhan, it's the same way it was in Legion. The volcanics will spawn under the carpet, so they're much harder to see. Overall, though, I mean, I think this is a great week for Tyrannical. This is like a Tyrannical push week. If you need Tyrannical rating or something, or there's some threshold you're trying to hit, I mean, yeah, bosses are tough for sure. And I find that like in that 20 threshold, generally I find that like Fortified feels better, but Tyrannical is doable. It's just like the Karazhans, for example, the bosses are so punishing.
Yeah.
But the other dungeons are not quite as bad, and you can move through the trash a bit faster. You do, I mean, yes, bursting can kill you, and it can cause partial wipes and stuff like that. So you do have to manage that. But overall, I love this combo for a Tyrannical week. It should be smooth. Your DPS can just kill stuff. And maybe hold up here and there if you're about to extend like a 4 stack of bursting to 5 stacks for another 4 seconds or whatever. But yeah, overall, I mean, last week was really a mixed bag. I did a fair amount of dungeons last week, and I did a lot of junkyards, as you might imagine, because that's kind of what I do.
Yeah.
And there were runs where explosive really screwed us up and resulted in deaths or wipes even. And there were runs where explosive was almost a non-factor. And, part of that is group execution and part of it is just dumb luck, There's not quite as much of that element this week. Like Volcanic has that same kind of random timer element as explosive spawns do, but it's so much easier to react to. And it's not gonna affect the group as much, right? It's gonna be at players who are distant from combat, so it's not going to be near melee, and even if it hits a player, it's not going to cause group-wide damage. So that's pretty big. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is a great combo. Maybe the best Tyrannical combo we've seen so far in Season 4. So if you need something, I would encourage you to make it happen this week, because I think you'll like the results out there as long as you don't, overwhelm your healer with bursting stacks.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty important to just watch out for the bursting, because I agree with you that Tyrannical week, I think what bothers me the most with Tyrannical, or what probably bothers a lot of people the most with Tyrannical, is wiping on a boss when you've committed 3 or 4 minutes to it. Because you're like, okay.
Yeah, it feels awful, and potentially, bloodlust or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so you wipe on trash, and it's like, well, that was like 30 seconds. We can still get back. It's fine. The deaths caused an additional 30 seconds. We lost like a minute and a half. You wipe on a boss on Tyrannical, and it's like, oh, we just wasted 3 minutes, plus we have to run back, plus, as you mentioned, we might have used cooldowns or abilities or some sort of thing like heroism to be able to try and do what we did that first time, and now we don't have that anymore. So, yes, Tyrannical, as much as it's an affix that can make dungeons a lot more difficult, it's really that feeling of losing time that I think is what gets me down when we're doing those sorts of things. Okay. Winds of Wisdom buff is up. It's up and running. It's been ongoing since last week. So if you're someone who wants that fast leveling experience for characters level 10 to 59, you can get it because you got the 50%. So just, get out there and do some leveling. Maybe that's something I'll relax and do at some point this week. If I can find the time to get in there and do it, I'll finish leveling up the rest of the characters I was looking at leveling. Because now that buff's back, that's great. We also have Hallow's End kicking off. That's going to be next Tuesday. That's the 18th of October. So for those who are excited about getting in the Halloween spirit, World of Warcraft, obviously their event with Hallow's End is kicking off on the 18th. So you can start jumping in on that. I know I've already started watching the horror movies with Robin here. So that's something we do all through October and really enjoy doing it. So obviously it's always nice. A good time. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything new this year, and we won't know for sure until next week. But I think I'm caught up. I think last year I got caught up on all the stuff I didn't have from Tricky Treats. So I may be doing minimal Hallow's End stuff at best this year, which kind of feels nice because I had all those costumes to grind out. I mean, the costume sets are really expensive, so I got to just go back through and check my collection and then check versus the vendors once it starts up. But I mean, we at the moment we don't know what's different, but one thing we can say is the Ember Court. Make sure you hit your Ember Courts if you're working on that, because we know you get the friendship buff during the holiday.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, before we dive into hot fixes and all the blue posts and all that sort of fun stuff that we discuss and talk about, obviously we have to mention the beta key giveaway and the keyword for that. So for those who are interested in getting yourself a beta key for Dragonflight, The keyword is Catalyst. That's Catalyst. So if you reply to the tweet that we put out on our account at the starting zone, then it's very clear it's the one that announced this episode and talked about this episode in it. You just reply with the word Catalyst. As long as you are following and you like the tweet, we will throw you in that giveaway, and we will give out a whole bunch of beta keys. So certainly enjoy doing that. Definitely. Okay, good. So Catalyst. All right. Notable hotfixes. Items and rewards. Adara, the heirloom broker located in Oribos, sells the following bind on account item now. Eternal Equipment Chest. It contains one piece of the 275 unranked PvP gear. This chest can only be purchased with Conquest by a character with a 1400 or higher rating in the PvP bracket. So, Jason, what's the story behind this one?
Well, I guess this is just, this got hotfixed in early last week, and it's just, if you have some excess Conquest at this point in the season and you want to start, give a little jump start to an alt character's gearing, you can get them some items from the vendor. So don't forget that it's out there. It's kind of, it's weird. We're in such a weird spot right now because we might only have 2 weeks left in the season. We don't exactly know when, as we're recording this, we don't know when pre-patch is going to be. I would say that smart money is on it being no later than November 1st, which, if you can believe it, is only like 3 weeks from right now. And it, there's a lot of kind of chatter that it's going to be October 25th, which is 2 weeks from right now. So, we're running out of time on season 4 stuff, and I would imagine that stuff like this will kind of go away or be really irrelevant, if not in that weird kind of in-between space that we find ourselves in the post-season pre-patch kind of universe. But, this thing is there. If you want to move it's essentially a way to move Conquest between characters, sort of. Obviously, 275 unranked PvP gear is not a huge prize, but if you want to just get started on a character, it's really, it's something. It's an easy way to take time you already invested in one character and apply it to getting power in another character, which is cool. I would love to see a Valor equivalent of this, especially considering how much I've been pounding dungeons in an uncapped Valor season from the jump. I would like some Valor gear to shuffle around. So, but yeah, PvPers, just be aware that that's out there if you want to start gearing up another character.
Yeah, it does seem as though the PvP team thinks of these things ahead of the PvE team, and I don't really know why that happens, but
yeah, I don't know if it's that, or if it's just easier to do with PvP for some reason, or PvP is kind of the test case, and they go, yeah, okay, if that worked out, I don't know, but yeah, it does seem like they kind of move on that stuff first. But, yeah. I have no Conquest, so I will not be taking advantage of this. But if you have something that you don't want to spend on anything, then yeah, you can get this from it's the vendor near the flight path, I think, right? The one upstairs.
Yeah, and if you don't have any Conquest, then do the PvP brawl for the week and do the dungeon, the arena and epic BG quests, and you'll have a bunch of Conquest for the week. So that's also an option to do those. All right, major factions overview. So there's a really big blog post that came out that sort of just went, hey, you know what? Here's all the major factions that you're going to want to know about in Dragonflight on the Dragon Isles, and this is kind of the basis for how their sort of renown system and everything else is going to work for it. So, Jason, do you want to go through a bit of this post for us?
Yeah, sure. Let me just read the section that they entitled "How It Works."
Sure.
That should describe how it works. You think, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what we want to know.
Yeah.
And let me just preface this by saying, the major factions in Dragonflight, they're a bit like traditional rep factions as we've seen in the past, but they are also a bit like Covenants done right, I would say, to some degree, because you have this renown system. I personally think renown was a big win in Shadowlands. I think renown was a great way to bring a reward system and a progression system in with a particular faction.
What's odd about it is the renown system satisfied my I want a battle pass without having to pay for a battle pass.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's clearly kind of inspired by a battle pass type thing, but in the subscription game, obviously you have plenty of stuff to do in WoW and plenty of ways to get rewards, but Renown was kind of a nice way to keep everybody sort of in the same like spot in progression, like everybody's experiencing a story at the same time or unlocking features around the same time, and then you can catch up quickly. And they concede some kind of cool rewards in the system that's a bit less grindy than a traditional reputation faction.
Right.
And so they're carrying some of these ideas forward into Dragonflight, but you don't have to pick one of these like you did with your Covenant in Shadowlands. You can work on your rep and renown with each of these factions all, at the same time as you go through and play different outdoor content. So in the blog post, it says how it works. The 4 major factions of the Dragon Isles are the Dragonscale Expedition, the Iskara Tuskar, the Maruk Centaur, and the Valdrakken Accord. And each major faction's progress is unique. As you build a reputation with your newfound friends, you'll participate in content fitting a variety of playstyles to earn prestigious titles and special rewards. If you're the outgoing type, you can also work toward gaining the respect and adoration of all the major factions if you wish. For those who like the added challenge, reach the highest renown rank with each major faction to complete achievements. To earn reputation and progress through the ranks of renown with major factions, along your journey, you'll complete solo and group events, supply and crafting quests, and work orders. You can hunt with the Shakar clan or escort clan Alag and protect them as they cross the Onaran Plains. Go ice fishing and help cook a feast for your new Iskar and Tuskar friends, or lay siege on Dragonbane Keep in a public event to assist the Obsidian Outcasts in reclaiming their home. So you kind of get the impression from this, like the stuff that you have to do with each of these factions is kind of thematically appropriate to what their purpose in the world is. And I kind of like that vibe. It tells its own story in a way. It's not all part of this, one narrative thread. It's like these are different people who inhabit this part of this world, and they all have kind of their own objectives and cultures and lifestyles and stuff. And if you want to gain reputation and gain renown with them, then you have to participate in their way of life, kind of, right? Like going on the hunt or cooking the feast and ice fishing and stuff like that. So that's kind of the overview of like what this means for us through level up and at max level.
Yeah. It's pretty neat overall. I think, and we talked about this earlier on when they were first introducing some of how the factions were going to work. Merging renown into them is it's very neat. Everyone disliked having the, friendly, honored, revered, exalted system of we just fill a bar. When the bar is totally full, you get 2 more things you can look at on a quartermaster vendor. And you're like, well, that's not super exciting. Like, this at least is progressive. You can sort of earn rewards along the way that feel more impactful. It's a better system to look at, was kind of the other thing. Like, just going into your reputation tab was kind of like, well, at this point for me, it's like 90 something or 100 and something reputations long. And you're like, okay, like there's got to be a better way to do this. So yeah, I'm excited about how this is going to feel for us once we actually start leveling up and experiencing the system. So yeah.
Yeah, and the UI is looking pretty nice too. I mean, I think the Renown UI in Shadowlands was pretty good, but
yeah, it was.
They've kind of been dressing it up a little bit for Dragonflight, and it looks, I think, even better from what I've seen so far in beta and in screenshots and stuff. So I think this is an interesting way to approach it, and I'll be curious to see what people think about it. Like, I feel like the traditional rep grind was really de-emphasized over the years, but no matter what they did, people still hated the concept of like log into the game and do these daily quests or these weekly activities to this degree, and then you achieve these, reputation thresholds. I mean, I remember in Vanilla and Burning Crusade and, to a lesser extent in Wrath and Beyond, that the rep grinds were like really legitimately kind of mindless activities of just like, all right, I'm going to go kill demons to get like marks of Sargeras, and, this is what I'm doing today until the bar gets full enough. And, they moved away from that more over time, but I feel like it's still something that players never really enjoyed or responded to very well. And some of the experiments they tried were less successful. Like even recently we had Archivist Codex in 9.1, and I thought that was okay, but I was also dumping like a ton of time into it. And the problem with something like that was it was more open-ended, but it was kind of high-rolly. And if you didn't put all the time in you could every day, you saw a lot of variance between, what kind of rewards you got for your daily play, which is not, great. I think in 9.2 it was a bit better. I mean, the Enlightened was still pretty standard, but you were getting these other benefits from getting, ciphers of the first ones and powering up your console, and other features like out in that zone were unlocking. So that was pretty good. It wasn't a renowned reputation, but it felt like you're getting these kind of incremental bonuses and benefits from participating in it on your way up in a way that older rep systems haven't felt like. So I think they have a lot of good stuff to build off of from what they did in Shadowlands. And I mean, I guess the thing I don't know, I just haven't seen it or played it. Like, I don't really know what the sort of end game is here. Like, what are the rewards at the top end of the system, and are they going to be things that high end like end game players feel like they need to grind out all four of these renowns to max because they need these benefits that you get from the end of it? They've kind of shied away from doing stuff like that lately, but there were definitely renown thresholds you had to hit in Shadowlands to get your conduits upgraded and everything like that. So obviously we have nothing comparable here, but if there's item rewards or something that might be desirable, then, or like recipes, I mean, crafting is going to be a much bigger part of our end game. Those might be things that we need to keep an eye on, but I just don't have any experience with it myself yet. But other than that, like that's a potential caveat of like any rep system they've ever done. I think that I'm looking forward to how this plays out. I think they've had some good ideas in this regard, and I think they're combining it in a cool way here.
Good. Yeah, I also get the impression that this is going to be pretty fun to check out. So next up, Mythic Plus in Dragonflight Season 1. So this is actually a community council post, for those of you who still remember that thing exists. We do like to cover these on the show because they're actually really good, and I think they go overlooked quite often. This comes in from Zacho, who's the lead encounter designer. Well, I guess one of the lead encounter designers on World of Warcraft, and is speaking specifically about the seasonal dungeon rotation at first here. So I'm just going to go through some of this because it's actually pretty interesting stuff. So if you've done Mythic Plus over multiple seasons, you've had the experience of running a particular dungeon over and over, chasing a prized item only to be faced with chasing that same item in the same dungeon following season as well. So that's not great.
You don't say.
Yeah. And
I've never had such an experience.
Yes, and they want to do something about it. So perhaps the biggest change coming in Dragonflight is that they're going to be rotating the entire set of Mythic Plus dungeons every season. They believe this will result in a better overall experience. So, like, this is what we're talking about. Like, Season 4 was, hey, you know what? We are just going to take all of these dungeons that you've had for the entirety of Shadowlands and rotate those out and put in all of these other dungeons that we now want to put in. And they're doing that again in Dragonflight, where they're doing these big rotations. And what they're sort of committing to here in this post is every season we will see a very large rotation. So that's actually kind of exciting. They say it's going to provide a better experience by primarily Mythic Plus players with providing primary Mythic Plus players with a greater sense of exploration and progression each season that raiders get to enjoy with the new raids. So similar, it's sort of like be very similar to what, we get a new raid every season as raiders. They get a bunch of new dungeons every season as Mythic Plusers, and that way it keeps things kind of spicy as far as that goes. They're going to be keeping the level of effort required to get the best rewards consistent over the new seasons. This is another one of those statements where I'm like, all right, let's see them deliver on that one, because they really do need to make sure that things are difficult enough, but also not so difficult that players who want to get the best reward in Season 1, who have now scaled up, gained higher item levels, gotten more comfortable with their class, potentially had other systems introduced into the game in the next season that make their characters more powerful, still feel like it's about the same amount of challenge to get the same rewards as they got in Season 1. That is a difficult thing to balance over an expansion. And creating space for returning players to jump into Mythic Plus even if they missed the previous seasons. So creating space for catch-up is what they're sort of talking about there. So imagine taking a break during Season 1 and coming back in Season 2, only to join a Mythic Plus group and feel like you're holding them back because everyone else knows a strategy you've never learned before. With dungeon rotating every season, everyone gets to start on a relatively even playing field to figure out new strategies together, which I also love, because I'm 100% that guy who's like in Season 2 partway through, like, you know what? I've done like these 4 Mythic Pluses a lot, so I know a lot of routes for them. I'm very good at those. But this one, I just dislike running, but I'm going to run it this time. And so I don't really know the route, and everyone else kind of knows the route. And, I'll kind of hang in the back and sort of follow the leader and see how things go. But I do feel like I'm kind of holding the group back. Whereas if we moved into season 2 and there's a whole new rotation, everyone's starting on the same page, which I think is actually going to be really cool to check out.
Yeah, I like the rotation. I got to say, we don't have a lot of precedent for this yet, but I mean, because we talked about it on the show, when the season 4 Shadowlands Mythic Plus rotation was announced, I was like, this sounds horrible. This is going to suck. I don't want to have to learn all these dungeons. I don't want to, this is not what I want. Like, I want to just like pay off all of the knowledge I've accrued in these dungeons over the course of the expansion and just coast into pre-patch and into Dragonflight. And I was totally wrong. I've liked this season better than any other season we've had. Part of it is because the seasonal affix is very simple and straightforward and powerful. And I think part of it too is that, like, not only are we, it's a fresh set of dungeons to approach in a Shadowlands context in terms of, systems and character power and tuning. It's also nice to have the variety. Like, I complained a lot about the Shadowlands aesthetic and just wanting to get away from it. And it's like, well, when I'm in dungeons, I'm in, Mechagon, or I'm in Karazhan, or, Draenor isn't Azeroth, and Warlord's Draenor is certainly not Azeroth, but like, I'm fighting like the Iron Horde, right? I'm fighting orcs. It's a very traditional kind of Warcraft feel. So I think like having that element also makes it kind of cool, because it just like the expansions are so heavily themed around certain things. Like, as cool as Dragonflight is and as cool as dragons are, I'm going to be sick of dragons 2 years from now, And so having these little glimpses into other parts of the game, different theming, different stuff to fight, that's also just psychologically, that's cool. It keeps it feeling fresh.
Well, and if they continue the teleports thing, right, you just end up with the more they do these rotations, the more they do these things, the more accessible the world becomes, as long as you take advantage of the systems when it's in place. Yeah,
but unlocking the portals and stuff is awesome. So, I like this. And I mean, I understand the argument that some people put forth, which is, I just want to play Dragonflight. I want to play the new dungeons. I don't want to play old dungeons. I don't want you to recycle old content. But I get that, and I don't think that's invalid, but I've seen the light because of season 4. I understand the value of having this existing content, reimagined in a way that is usable in the current game, and having this rotation and leaning on that stuff to create, just a wider breadth of experiences for players to play and dungeons to figure out. So I am, at the moment, I'm all for the rotation. We'll see how it actually feels once we get in there. And then we have we have some old dungeons coming into season 1, right? Because we got like mist dungeons.
Yep. Pumped about that, man.
Yeah, I am too, but it might be weird. Jade Serpent, I think, has the markings of being like a freehold or a junkyard style. Maybe depending on tuning, like it could be like a fast, efficient run. But it'll be, that to me, that'll be the thing. Like, all right, here are brand spanking new Dragonflight dungeons that are gorgeous, and they're designed with Mythic Plus keystones in mind, and they're designed with this version of our player classes in mind. And we're going to put them up there with 10-year-old dungeons from Mists of Pandaria that we've grafted, Mythic Plus affixes onto, and we'll see how it feels. So, I don't know. There might be situations where doing this kind of huge, broad rotation of dungeons doesn't work out, but, from what I've experienced so far, I think it's a cool idea.
I also feel like that enough of the player base started playing recently enough that you're going to have people who are still experiencing something new, and it's kind of cool to check out. Like, I don't know how many.
Oh yeah.
What percentage of the player base was around when Pandaria was a thing, and that these dungeons were something that they actually got to check out and do, and they certainly didn't get to do them on challenge mode unless they were actually playing during the expansion. And even then they might not have, because not a lot of people did those. And so then having essentially the expansion where challenge modes were really introduced, now being the expansion that we're going to start having Mythic Plus inside of these, is something that just makes a lot of sense to me. So that'll be pretty cool. I'm looking forward to it. All right, seasonal affixes. What role do they play? Why do they keep making them? Well, they keep making them because it sort of shakes up the game. It makes things more interested, adds a twist to dungeons. It gives players an opportunity for sort of a thematic flavor to be experienced with something like having N'Zoth or, Denathrius or whatever it is impacting the world and impacting the dungeons that you're taking place in and sort of making it relevant to what's happening currently in the game as far as the story goes. And of course, they're a great place for Blizzard to experiment with things like affixes inside raids, which was an experiment I didn't like. But yes, they can actually put in new debuffs, new, ways of spawning mobs, new interrupt / CC things that you need to deal with, see how players react to them, see what works and what doesn't. And it's a pretty good way to test that out without committing to having something that's going to be the entire expansion, right? Especially when you're rotating seasons, you can rotate affixes based off the seasons. And you can actually have some things phase out that did not work and something new phase in that you want to test or might be more fun. They can also always bring things back. I think it'd be interesting to see if they're bringing back old dungeon content. If a season or so they did a weekly rotation of different seasonal affixes for a season would be kind of a crazy thing, right?
That would be, yeah.
You get Gahooni's back one week, you get the Bonsomity thing back one week, you get the, they just sort of rotate stuff through. Would be another crazy thing for them to do at some point.
I would like them to revisit the N'Zoth style seasonal affix, even if it's different mobs, but the ability, to make the kind of wormhole tunnel through Ny'alotha, which really opened up your ability to path through a dungeon.
Yep.
That kind of thing was great. It wasn't like direct character power. It's not like it buffed you like the Season 4 affix does, for example, but it gave you a lot. It just especially late in the expansion when we'd been doing the dungeons for 2 years almost, it just gave you different ways to play and to approach the dungeons that you never could do before, which that, I think that's why an affix like that was such a success, because it's all about approaching, these problems in different ways or presenting new problems to players to keep the system feeling, interesting and interactive.
Yeah. Goes on to say, but as great as seasonal affixes have been, they also have limitations. With their relatively high complexity and strong seasonal ties, they're mostly lost in history once the season is over. It's not true. I remember Gahooni's very well. While they do have
the history of Gahooni's.
Yes. Well, they do have experimental value. They don't contribute a much long-term benefit to Mythic Plus as they like. So not as much of a long-term benefit as they like. A side effect of the dungeon rotation change above is it takes pressure off the seasonal affix to be the big thing that transforms your gameplay in a new season. And this has given us space to really think about what seasonal affixes might look like going forward. Should we try to make seasonals that become more regular affixes in the future? Should we stop doing them in favor of something else entirely? There are lots of interesting questions to consider as we move forward. On Beta Realm, you'll soon be seeing an experimental version of a seasonal affix named Thundering. While we're still iterating heavily, and it's likely the function will change, but it should give a sense of the level of complexity we'd like seasonal affixes to occupy in Dragonflight. Since you'll already be learning a whole new set of dungeons, the seasonal affix can be less complicated and focus more on being thematic flavor. Another shift you'll likely be seeing is a reduction in the amount of borrowed power provided by seasonal affixes. While feedback on beneficial affixes has been positive, and it's a space where they definitely want to continue exploring, we hit a level of power in Shadowlands that felt extreme and contributed heavily the short circuit effect of describing above. They'll be keeping an eye on both how this works in playtests and on what player feedback is about them, and may try other directions if it doesn't work out the way they'd like it to. For example, there is a world where they have beneficial effects closer to Shadowlands, but also make enemies more powerful to offset that extra power. The key takeaway here is that they want to continue experimenting with Mythic Plus, and they'll hope that we'll appreciate seeing a bigger difference in the experience with each season in Dragonflight. So, a few things to unpack here. The first is, I really like the concept of, this seasonal affix is kind of lame, and we're not really into it. This didn't really change much, because we're just running the same dungeons, and all I do now is at the beginning, I choose a buff, and then I just don't have to worry about it for the rest of the dungeon, or all I do is I click this, rune that's there, and then I choose a particular effect that I want, but it's really kind of set, because I always pick the same ones every time. That became dull very quickly inside of Mythic Plus. So by changing up the rotation, that isn't necessarily the only new thing that happens every season, right? The affix isn't the only new thing. Also have a new rotation, which can then actually sort of spice things up a bit more. So I like that they lean that way.
Yeah, also, I mean, I think just to kind of frame this a little bit, seasonal affixes were a thing they started doing at the beginning of BFA, right?
Yeah.
So Mythic Plus Keystones came in Legion, and we didn't have any kind of concept of a seasonal affix, although we did see dungeons added to the pool pretty much every season roll in Legion, because we had so many patch dungeons in that expansion. So there was always like new dungeons to do, but then they ended up, that was like sort of the season refresh in a way, but they were so much harder than the rest of the pool usually that they were dead keys. So, what they wanted to do in BFA was introduce the concept of the seasonal affix. And in BFA, it was a lot of stuff that kind of slowed you down, right? Like the Gahoon infested thing, like you had to identify where those mobs were and control them or kill them quickly, make sure that you weren't creating this chain reaction, The Bwansamdi affix was basically, you had to sort of plan out where you're going to hit every 20 percentage points on the enemy forces, and then you'd have to contend with, getting the, all the ghosts and stuff you killed down before you move on to the next pack. Season 3, the Ashara affix was like, okay, there's certain mobs that are like really dangerous in these packs, and there's different ways you have to react to them. So, you had to, that changed up your pathing, or it changed up your priority in dungeons that you already knew, and then then season 4 was like, okay, now you're going to get a benefit actually from doing this. It doesn't just make it harder. Like there's stuff you have to kill, but it can, open up these skips you could never do before. And then in Shadowlands, they started leaning it more into this thing of the seasonal affix is a kiss curse. Like it's going to like hurt you. There's like a dangerous thing you have to contend with, but you're going to get powered up, And we had the, I forget what it was called in season 1, but the anima mob things that you had to kill. And then you get like a huge buff for a very brief duration, right? And so they would pop out every 20%. So it was kind of like what we had before in BFA. You had to kind of map out your 20%, get your buff, use your buff to kill dangerous stuff or pull big or whatever. And then season 2 was the anima power themed one. And, you wanted to try to get your anima powers as early as you could in the dungeon and kill the mini bosses, and then you'd just be ridiculously powerful. And, season 3 was pretty similar with the Automa. Like you wanted to just keep getting the stuff that would give you the CDR and the regen. And season 4 is just like, okay, what secondary do you like? You just have more of it than you could ever possibly need. These have really kind of fundamentally changed how your character plays inside these dungeons. Like they have gone, they in Shadowlands, they leaned way far into seasonal affix means huge buff for your character. I don't know how I feel about that overall. Like I think it worked out okay in Shadowlands, but I certainly didn't not like, especially the season 2, 3, and 4 affixes in Shadowlands. But I also sort of see the like dead end of like, how do we keep doing this in novel ways that aren't just like repeating without power creeping ridiculously? I do think that's a bit of a dead end design wise. It is this weird like arms race you're getting into with yourself, and like how hard do the mobs have to be to justify how powerful the seasonal affix is? Like I think it's probably better to just have some theming that ties into like the end boss or whatever, and something for players to avoid or contend with inside the dungeon. I think is fine. Like we had basically an entire expansion of that in BFA, and I think those seasonal affixes were mostly okay. I don't like ones that are tied to a specific amount of percentage on enemy forces. That creates like weird concerns that I don't like having to do on the fly of like, okay, how many packs we need to pull to pop this thing? Like, yeah, I just want to go through the dungeon and kill stuff. So I mean, personally, I'm okay in a world where the tuning reflects the fact that the seasonal affix is not buffing my team. Like I think that's an okay trade-off. Give me something else to contend with. Keep the mobs where, you don't expect me to have 130% haste in order to kill them.
Yeah, exactly. So this post continues on to talk a little about rewarding the dedicated players. And so we'll dig into that a little bit, which is throughout Shadowlands, we've observed a trend where players who've mastered a set of Mythic Plus dungeons are seeing their sense of progression short-circuited in subsequent seasons. This is a complex problem that intersects with several of the topics outlined above, but the bottom line is that something valuable is lost when the best gear you can get from Mythic Plus isn't necessarily something you can earn by investing time and effort into getting really good at Mythic Plus. Wow, that's kind of refreshing to hear a dev kind of say, because I think that applies to everything in the game at the moment. It's really disappointing when the best thing that you can get, you can't get by just grinding the game to get it. You have to rely on an RNG chance for something to happen, and often it's a limited chance that can only happen once per week or once every short period of time. So, yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. This complex problem, to be clear, this does not mean we want to make Mythic Plus less rewarding. It's a major pillar of the endgame for World of Warcraft players, and for those who want to focus on it should have access to competitive rewards. What it does mean is that we want Mythic Plus to have more of a sense of progression as you push into higher keys, and we want the gear you get to reflect to feel like a reflection of that. To achieve this goal, we're making two big changes. First, starting with Keystone level 11, we're increasing the rate at which enemies gain health and damage with each subsequent key from 8% to 10%. The impact of this change isn't dramatic at any given key level, but it should contribute to giving each step up more of a sense of progression and make it easier for us to step up rewards accordingly. So, okay. That means if you want your Keystone Master, you're going to have to work a little bit harder for it, is what this is coming down to. Second, they're adjusting the item level of gear rewards, both from the end of Dungeon of Run chests and from the Great Vault, and scaling their item level growth up to Keystone level 20, which means, hey, if you want max reward, it's sounding like you're going to have to run a 20 to be able to get it. We're also introducing an additional upgrade Valor tier, which will increase the maximum item level of Valor upgrades that players can unlock with Mythic Plus gear ratings. You can view in the chart below. So they linked a chart. What they're basically saying is the Great Vault reward is obviously scales higher as the keystones get higher, but like initially, like a +2, they're saying end of run is 376, Great Vault is 382. So there's a 6 item level gap, right? But as soon as you go to a 3, it goes from 376 end of run to 385 end of run, Great Vault, which means that you suddenly have a 9 item level jump. And that sort of continues along right up to 20. So at 20, there's actually a 16 item level difference between the end of run reward, which is a 405, and the actual Great Vault reward, which is a 421. So pretty huge leap as far as that goes. And if you look at the item levels for end of run, to get your maximum reward end of run that you're looking to get, you have to run at least a 19 to be able to get that. It's a 405 end of run piece. And they sort of paired them up. So if you run anywhere between a 10 and a 13, you're going to get 392's end of run. But in each of those steps up, obviously the Great Vault reward improves by 3 item levels. So that's kind of a neat thing that they see sort of happening. So what it comes down to is, if you want to get max rewards for Mythic Plus, you can get it. You just have to run a 20 now, is what they're going for. And you're going to see more benefit in running higher end keys regularly. You don't want to just run 14s all the time or 15s all the time to get max end of run reward. You're going to have to push that push the difficulty of the Mythic Plus you're doing to see a better reward. Because right up until 19s, you are gaining item levels from end of run by just running higher keys, except for in those little blocks where like 17 and 18 are both 402, 15 and 16 are both 398. Like that's an interesting sort of waiver point, right, of seeing that. And the difference between doing a 14 and a 20 is 10 item levels from end of run. It's huge. It's a huge difference. So I do feel like this is going to encourage a lot of players to sort of dive into the system a lot more and push keys higher.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is because we have this more kind of granular item level rewards throughout the game, right? Like in Raid, for example, we talked about that at length last week about how you sort of have this mid-tier step up, within a difficulty of item level. I want to kind of frame this with where item levels are at from Raid.
Oh, that was my next conversation. All right, go for it.
All right. So just to set a baseline, LFR drops 376 for the first few bosses, and by the end you go through 382 to 385 drops. So that's equivalent to +2, +3 keystones, +4 keystones. Normal, 389 is the lowest that it drops. It drops up to 398. So now you're more in the like +5 and up rank, somewhere in there, up to about +10. Now keep in mind, you also have these special items that are +6, +7 item levels all the time at each of these
particular bosses.
difficulties.
Yeah.
Yep. Heroic starts at 402 and tops out at 411. So now you're looking at like +11 to about +15. And Mythic is 415 to 424. So you're looking at +16 through +20 and up. And you can get, from Mythic Plus, you can get that mid step. You can get up to 421. So that's like mid-tier Mythic item level from your weekly vault. You can't get that 424. That is still for killing, Mythic last 2. But, that's it's a bit better on the way up from where we are now. And then that extra upgrade tier at 2400 rating. I mean, 2400 rating is going to be a lot. It's going to be tough. It's for the very experienced and invested Mythic Plus players. But then you can Valor upgrade to 415, which is Mythic baseline, which is gonna, if you can get these kind of upgrades, then that's going to help you get more Mythic Plus rating. So the system just has a lot more granularity. There's a lot more. It's just more rewarding all the way across the board, I feel like.
Well, except for
I do think
it's for Mythic Plus.
Mythic Plus is what I'm talking about. Like, I do think people are going to look at this and go, well, now I have to do a +20 to get max reward. And it's like, that is a way to look at it, but I don't think it's the correct way. I think the way to look at it is, I am going to do Mythic Plus to the best of my ability to get the highest reward that I can. If tuning is anywhere near what it's been this expansion for +20s, like, you're not just going to like stroll into a Pug +20 playing some off meta spec and bumble your way through it and time your +20 and get your max reward out of your Great Vault the following week. Like, it's going to be hard to do. So you may have to set your sights a bit more. If you're Heroic Raider, you may have to be more in that 15-ish realm for a while until you work your way up the system, and then you can benefit from it, which is a bit of a shift. I mean, for what we've mostly had is like, for Raiders, Mythic Plus is this kind of complementary system that you use to get like high item level pieces and particular items. And then, you, with the purpose of raiding with them, and you're not, working your way up the Mythic Plus system specifically is not really the goal. This may change that. I'm kind of two minds here, because for myself, I love these changes. This is going to benefit me greatly, because I am confident that my team for Mythic Plus is going to be able to get into that +20 range. We have a lot of skill. We work well as a team together. We kind of cover each other's weaknesses. We talk about strats and how to, do better at the keys that we're attempting. Like, we work very well as a team, and that is typically rewarded in this game, right? So I think me and the 4 people that I tend to do a lot of keystones with are going to work our way up the system, get 2400 rating, get our weekly 421s, and then we're going to go into Heroic Raid and smash heroic bosses, because we have, 415 plus item level, and there will be people in the raid group that do not have that item level, and they will not see the benefit that we see, and they will feel bad. I feel like for a long time, Mythic Plus has stepped on Heroic Raid loot pretty severely, and this makes that a lot worse. If you're like a high level keystone runner, Heroic Raid is badly de-emphasized at this point compared to Valor upgrades and end of run and weekly Great Vault. So that's, now one thing that they've been trying to do is add unique items to raid bosses, stuff that you can't really account for just in terms of sheer item level, or like goosing item level like they're going to do in Dragonflight on key pieces. I think that will help quite a bit, because there'll be specific things that people want to target at a raid. Like, as a player, I'm excited about this because I love doing dungeons, and I want I want to be able to upgrade to 415 item level. I want to pull 421s out of my weekly box. Plus with the catalyst and everything, that's Mog. It's Mythic Mog. I'm not going to kill these Mythic raid bosses. I can get the Mog from, gear that I Valor upgrade. Amazing. But as a raid leader, as a GM, as somebody who tries to keep like a consistent team together for heroic raiding, I do have concerns about this because I don't think they've done enough to emphasize or like give heroic raiding a niche compared to Mythic Plus over the years. They just keep eroding it more and more, and it's like, I don't know. Some players just want a raid log, like they really do, and they want to show up and for their raid schedule weekly and not do much else outside of that, and the game is raiding to them. But that's fine. I think the game is pretty amenable to that at this point. Like I think you can do that and succeed at a certain level. But those players also tend to feel slighted or like I want to say jealous. I don't know if that's really the right way to put it, but like those players rightfully are like, well, I'm disadvantaged because I don't do keystones. And it's like, well, there has to be other stuff to do for players that want it in the game outside of just raiding and killing a raid boss once a week and hope it drops a piece of loot, I don't know what the answer there is. Like, I don't know how you emphasize heroic raiding and make it feel like something that's worth being part of an organized team for when this is the kind of stuff that the Mythic Plus system is spitting out. Maybe the bonus item level pieces with the special effects are the way to do that. Have really cool raid loot that, people can't say no to, the 418 version of or something out of the heroic raid, I guess.
Yeah. So that's kind of the sticky point I wanted to get to when I want to compare this to raid is I actually really enjoy that you can push with Valor upgrades up to 415 with a 2400 rating, because it means players have to put a lot of effort in to get 2400, and then they can push up, and that's baseline Mythic. I think that makes sense to me. But as a Mythic Raider, Mythic Plus is like a kiss curse for me in general. It's fun to do for a brief period of time, and it becomes a chore very quickly that eats up a lot of time. So the big caveat for this entire system for me is raid tuning. If it feels as though the raids are tuned with the expectation that the Mythic difficulty players who are doing raid are farming Mythic Plus, farming Mythic Raid, doing every single bit they can to get every single bit of upgrade because the margins are that tight on being able to hit checks to kill bosses, this is a very negative system for me as far as like, I don't want to have to commit this much time to playing the game on a regular basis to be able to actually complete content. And I don't think it's a smart decision to do that because it limits the amount of people who can actually participate in something like Mythic Raiding. And why would you even design a difficulty around it when you're limiting it that much? So I'm hoping that obviously the piece of information we don't have is how difficult these raids are going to actually feel throughout this entire expansion. Not just the initial raid. The initial raid typically is a bit of a softball, a bit more of a softball. It wasn't obviously inside Shadowlands, but it has been in the past. So I expect that, this raid's not going to be that bad based off of testing that we've done so far. However, it needs to be consistent through the entire expansion. I want to see them in general take the difficulty of Mythic raids down several notches from what we've been seeing. I want it to be more accessible. Mythic raids should be, in my opinion, more about meeting particular mechanical checks for a team than having the item level to be able to brute force your way through things to a certain degree, or meet a check to actually be able to complete an encounter. I think it's okay to do one or two of those in a raid tops. I think as soon as you start basing a large part of the raid around having a certain amount of DPS to even be able to accomplish a fight, and less about, hey, it's all these mechanics from normal and heroic, plus these other one or two mechanics that make things a little bit more spicy, that's when I think you drift into a bad realm. Because that should be what you're aiming for, is we're just adding complexity to the fight, not necessarily the requirement for players to execute incredibly well at the highest level. I think that deters people from doing Mythic content, similarly to how I think it deters people from doing high Mythic Plus. So I think it's nice with Mythic Plus, at least, that there's a lot of granularity. There's not as much granularity between Heroic and Mythic as far as rating goes. So I would want to see them take Mythic rating down a notch to sort of help players have, I guess, a larger pool to pull from to be able to actually participate in that content, because right now it's pretty limited, and I think it's going to get even weirder with the whole faction thing with cross faction in Mythic, where people are trying to get, Hall of Fame, or at least have guild runs to get achievements and whatnot, and you have to have a certain amount of Alliance and Horde sort of favored in your team to be able to actually accomplish those things and have it count as a guild run. So it's going to be an interesting system. I like the direction they're moving as far as the granularity goes. I like the Valor upgrade system. I just don't want it to feel as though if you aren't participating in these things, then you're at a significant disadvantage in trying to actually accomplish Mythic raiding content. So yeah, that's where my perspective, and again, it's my perspective, that of a Mythic raider who is going into this next expansion versus everyone else, and I am in the very small minority, and I acknowledge that this is a great system for a lot of individuals out there who may not participate in raid a lot and participate in dungeons primarily or get Valor upgrades elsewhere. It's a great system for you guys. I love that. It's definitely who they should be catering to. I dislike seeing the Mythic raid scene slowly die off over time, and it has been slowly dying off for like a decade now. So
yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I'm coming at it from kind of a different angle, but I mean, we're talking about the same problems, I think, in a lot of ways. Ian Hazzikostas kind of publicly said, like, yeah, we messed up, especially with Sepulcher. Like, it's too hard. And I've been saying that Mythic raiding is generally too hard for a long time now. And I mean, whatever, you can roast me for that. I should just get good or whatever. And I get that to some degree. Like, you want to have something that's really challenging and that's like the top end of the challenge, and something that people can kind of plant their flag and say, hey, we killed this boss or whatever. Absolutely. And I think the game needs stuff like that, needs that kind of aspirational content, and you want stuff where people can prove that they're, the best or whatever. But by the same token, you have a lot of content that players don't get to experience, and teams that maybe like could get, maybe not cutting edge, but like extend the life of the content a little bit longer, have been kind of shut out from, the bosses just present these like really hard roadblocks early on in the raid, and then people on more casual teams just lose interest. They don't want to put the wipes in. I want
to interject real quick and just mention that I guess the thing that stands out the most about this is, what's the timeline that is an acceptable timeline for a large portion of the players who are going to be doing Mythic content to complete the Mythic content? Like, for me,
right.
If you put in, like, how many hours is really what it comes down to, right? Like, if you put in 20 hours a week, which is a lot, to Mythic raiding, right? How many weeks should it take for you to complete that content? Should it take 2 months? Are we talking about this taking 160 plus hours to complete the Mythic raid content? Is that acceptable on any level to anyone out there? Like, that to me is the factor that sort of comes. Like, I would like to see raids clearable in like 40 to 50 hours is what I would like to see on Mythic content. Like, they never have been, and people might say, well, they absolutely are clearable in 40 to 50 hours if you do those 40 to 50 hours over 6 months. And you're like, well, yes. If you take the time to gear up in other locations and other things, you can do that. But I think it's one of those cases of, I'd like to see that if teams who put in 10 or 12 hours a week can clear the thing in a month and a half. I think that's pretty respectable as far as a timeline goes for Mythic. I think going longer than that puts you into this weird realm of, well, you've been at this content for 3 months. Everyone on the team hates it now. People are quitting left, right, and center, or backing off doing this content because they just don't want to be here anymore. And so, like, there's the extreme of both ends. You don't want the content to be cleared in 2 weeks because then everyone's bored for the rest of the expansion, but you also don't want it to be cleared in 3 months because then everyone just hates the game. Like,
right. Yeah, it's, I don't know. I feel like they kind of painted themselves into a corner as time went on. And I think my hope is that Sepulcher was kind of revelatory for them and that they are going to walk this back a bit. And you know what, man? Like, if Vault of the Incarnates is a new Emerald Nightmare, like, I kind of think so be it. I kind of think we need a big reset. And what I mean by that is, it's a relatively easy raid that high-end teams clear very quickly. Fine. Like we got a lot of changes coming into this game. They are trying to set this game up for the long term with 10.0 and with Dragonflight. And there's a lot of moving pieces. And, having maybe a lower challenge bar to get through the PvE content is maybe appropriate right now.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that they need to do for the game's health in general, is to make all different types of playstyles compelling, right?
Yeah.
And that includes PvP, that includes Keystone Dungeons, it includes outdoor content like the Renown stuff we were talking about, it includes raiding. I think if you make Mythic Plus compelling, it can make people interested in the game and want to participate in raiding, even with, if they're gearing up primarily through dungeons or whatever. I don't think it's necessarily like a problem where you're cannibalizing people's playtime away from raids. But I think the element that has not received enough attention is guilds. And if you make just being a part of a guild and participating in some kind of thing that benefits the guild, receiving benefits from participating in your guild, I think that sort of naturally lends itself to bolstering raid teams, having people interested in raiding or participating in raids. It's kind of one of these pillars of what WoW was built around, what WoW used to be, that has sort of just been forgotten. And I think if you make Mythic Plus awesome and you make it a way that people can obtain mastery over the system and get really cool items and get a lot of character power, that's great. That's a big win for the game. If you make raids accessible and fun, challenging but rewarding, have cool unique items that really bring forth certain types of play styles, maybe you have like a cool signature drop from a boss that like you can show off in town or whatever, or gives you some kind of benefit that really dovetails well with the way your character is built, like versus maybe just like a stat stick that comes out of a dungeon. Like these are great ways to make raiding appealing, but the way you tie this stuff all together is with the social structure of the game. And communities just didn't do it. We haven't seen a big guild overhaul that really made a difference. And my hope is that at some point they can do something about cross-faction functionality for guilds, and maybe something with cross-realm functionality or something. Maybe, the realm concept as we've known it kind of going away so that people can be more fluid with who they play with and what guilds they join. And stuff like that, I think, could bolster raiding a lot. If it's fun to do and it's rewarding, guilds are the engine that keep raids running, in my opinion, and if people want to find a good guild to be in and to raid with, then I think that's going to bolster raiding more than like, oh, Mythic Plus being rewarding is harming raiding. Like, no, it doesn't. It does kind of feel like that right now because we don't have these other supports around it. But like, the game being fun and rewarding should be good for all other elements of the game, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, so the last part of this blog post talks specifically about another change they're making to the affix, the weekly affixes. They're actually going to rotate Inspiring and Necrotic out. And by doing that, they obviously then pull 2 weeks out of the whole rotation by just removing those two affixes, which means it goes down to a 10-week rotation to sort of have all the affixes move through. They actually go on to say, Inspiring is a good affix for changing up your gameplay when you have thorough knowledge of a dungeon, but it can feel especially punishing while you're still learning. This didn't feel like a good fit with the increased emphasis on learning dungeons each season going forward. And Necrotic was originally intended to be an affix that challenged tanks, but it's become increasingly apparent that the roading responsibilities are already a tremendous pressure on tanks in Mythic Plus, so we'd like to try to give this affix a vacation. And with shorter affix rotation overall, we're hoping that we can reduce the perceived disparity in difficulty between weeks and allow players to feel more regularly like meaningful progression and increase their Mythic Plus rating. So the same issue I had with Faded of like, hey, we've put all this time working towards learning how to do this dungeon or learning how to do this raid, and now we're not going to see it again for a couple of weeks thing, right? Like that was an issue I had, is sort of something they're highlighting as kind of a thing as well in Mythic Plus, where we put all this time into learning how to do this particular dungeon with these affixes, and now we're not going to see them again for 12 weeks, right? Like, great. So by shortening that down and by removing these affixes that make things particularly more challenging for players inside their role or just in general throughout a dungeon, it will allow them to help with that issue that they're talking about. So yeah, I think overall, I like the idea of rotating out some affixes per season. I think that could be a kind of a cool thing to sort of see some rotate out and rotate back in, and see that tighter, shorter rotation would be kind of fun to see.
Yeah, it all kind of feeds into the theme of keeping stuff fresh from season to season and just having new reasons to revisit Mythic Plus and just approach it in different ways. I'm certainly not going to complain about there being fewer affixes in the pool. Inspiring is obnoxious, especially on like Fort Weeks or something. It's just Inspiring is one of those that it doesn't feel interactive, right? Like obviously the counterplay is kill or CC the inspired mob or whatever, but a lot of dungeon combat is about being reactive, right? And what can you pull and how can you pull it? How much stuff can you fight at once, or where are you going to fight it? And then, drop a stun on this thing or fear this mob or whatever. Whatever you have in your toolkit to like stop a cast or break up an effect, displace something, like all these tools in your toolkit that feel fun to use in dungeons. Inspiring turns that off unless you really slow yourself down to work around it. So I don't think Inspiring is a good fit for where we're at with Mythic Plus as a concept anymore. That's just my personal opinion. I think it's just one of the more obnoxious affixes because it doesn't feel fun to play around. Necrotic, I mean, there's been a big campaign to delete Necrotic. A lot of people really hate Necrotic. I don't mind it, to be honest. I feel like they've nerfed it so much that it's not really a factor. Like I have to keep an eye on it, and then I have to use a movement ability to, let it drop off. Granted, I mostly play Warrior in Keystones, and Warrior has a lot of tools to, shockwave the pack, stun it all, and then leap away. And then by the time it wakes up and can get anywhere near you, your Necrotic has ticked off. Also, I'm a main tank for a very, very long time, and it's pretty much all I do, so I'm confident with this kind of stuff. You want to encourage people to tank Keystones. You kind of need them. There are probably fewer tanks than anything else in terms of, representation in the player base, because you need fewer of them to do any kind of content than you do anything else. So anything that, maybe makes people feel a little bit more willing to, throw on a tank spec and give a Keystone a shot, I think is a big win for dungeon players. So, and I'm not going to miss Necrotic next season. I'm not going to weep for it. But it's definitely a thing that pressured tanks maybe more than a lot of players really felt was comfortable or fun. Personally, I didn't really mind it in recent iterations, but
the reduced duration was big. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love it if we could get down to like an 8-week affix rotation, though. Let's cut it down even a little bit more, and maybe we'll see that as time goes on. I think 12 weeks.
Let's get rid of Quaking. Let's get that out of there.
Right. Yeah, like 12 weeks is good for stuff like the weekly event, or the PvP brawl rotation, stuff like that. I think is on about 12-week long rotations. So I kind of get the concept of wanting everything to be on a 12-week rotation, or as many things as you can kind of click into this 12-week rotation, but. I think having just having fewer affixes in the pool and having a tighter rotation, to me, is a bit more interesting to experiment with.
Yeah. All right. So while we were chatting away, a blue post went out that officially announced the end of Season 4's date. So October 25th is when Season 4 officially closes. So this is everyone's big old heads up that you have 2 weeks before they shut down Season 4. And we move into the off season. So what does this mean? Well, the current season of Shadowlands PvP content is going to end at 10 p.m. Pacific time, the night before maintenance in each region. And with the season's end, it will no longer be possible to earn the PvP seasonal rewards, titles, or Shadowlands Season 4 rankings. As far as Mythic Plus goes, the current season of Mythic Plus content will continue. Content will end with the start of regional maintenance on October 25th. In NA, 26 EU, 27 in Asia, with the season's end rating that qualify for the 0.1% Shrouded achievement title. That's when it's going to be recorded. So basically when maintenance hits on the 25th, that is when it ends for Mythic Plus, which means people will be running all night, I'm sure, to be sure they're in that 0.1%, whereas PvP, the night before maintenance, it's shutting down at 10 p.m. Pacific time. The title Shrouded will be rewarded during the following weeks after the season ends, so be sure to wait for changing factions until after you've received it. That'd be a really crappy thing to have happen. If you were like, yay, the season's done, I'm going to swap over to this other faction and have some fun, and then you've lost your 0.1% Shrouded title because you happened to do that too early. So just the big old caveat with all these things with PvP as well, guys, like wait until the titles have been rewarded, the mounts and stuff have been rewarded, before you switch factions, because you want to be sure all that stuff's out of the way. It's going to take a few weeks for them to do it all, so just keep that in mind. But yes, October 25th, That's the official end date. We now have the 2-week window for everyone to figure their stuff out.
Yep, this means this is your last Tyrannical week of Season 4. So if you need Tyrannical rating or something, if you're trying to, get to some rating threshold, this is your last chance in Season 4 to get Tyrannical points, so keep that in mind.
Yep.
Now, there's no confirmation in here that this means the pre-patch is October 25th. I would say it's a reasonable bet that it will be, right? But there's probably some checks they have to meet or something before they actually announce that, and maybe they're not quite there yet or something. It would be really weird if they turned the season off and then there was nothing new to do on October 25th after maintenance, and we're in this weird post-season limbo where we can't earn any new stuff.
There's nothing new to do.
There's nothing new to do. There's no new achievements. We're playing the exact same characters we were playing the day before.
Yeah.
But it's just Shadowlands Season 4 postseason. I mean, I guess this means that everything will be faded the week of the 25th. All 3 raids will be faded, regardless of, what happens with patch or whatever. But yeah, so that, it's possible. It's possible that we don't get pre-patch, I guess. But it certainly seems like if they're shutting the season off, that patch will follow. But either way, we're not more than like 3 weeks out from patch, I wouldn't think anyway. But make sure if you got stuff to wrap up this season, like you are on a very short timer at this point.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, 2 more posts before we wrap up. This one is about beta reputation and renown adjustments from Bornak. Says, hello, some changes we recently made that affected reputation and renown. This is obviously in beta. As we have added different sources of reputation, it has become harder to reward the amounts that felt meaningful. As a result, we made a variety of changes to reputation rewards alongside increases to the reputation needed for renown ranks from 1,000 to 2,500. Here's a breakdown of some of these changes. So the previously weekly world quests have become daily, while the frequency of some of the others have increased to twice a week. So this is interesting, right? So they're like, all right, we recognize that some people want to be able to earn these things faster, so we're going to make them a daily quest to encourage players to log in more frequently. But we're not going to make all of them that way. We'll make some of them twice a week, so people who can only log in every now and then can still actually do some of it. Now, right off the bat, this change actually rubs me a little bit the wrong way, because I liked the idea of weekly quests, because it meant that players could log in on Saturday or Sunday and still feel like they're accomplishing their weekly rewards, as opposed to, nope, sorry, you missed the previous 4 days, you're now behind everyone else. This is something we discussed very early on with Season 3 when it was coming out. And so I am a little bit disappointed that they moved this direction. Anyways, we've lowered the renown level requirement of certain activities, such as climbing quests, cataloging quests, and Siege of Dragonbane, so that players hit the unlock sooner. Level up quests have been adjusted so that players are reaching max level with most of the activities unlocking, and the weekly wrapper quests now changes slightly each week. The reputation requirement will go up, but the overall increased reputation gain should result in a lower completion time for most players, as in it's faster to complete it, I believe, is the way they phrase that. Result in a lower completion time.
Right. You should be able to get whatever the weekly wrapper is done faster as a result of these changes. Okay. Yeah. So that's
sometimes the language I gotta take a moment on.
Right. Like if you heard somebody say it to you, it might be different, but trying to read it, and also Bornak had to clarify. He edited and clarified this post a little bit. This is the final text we have in here, but the way it initially went out made it sound like the weekly world quests were turning into daily quests, not world quests. Not daily world quests. So the problem is that words like quests do a lot of work, and when it comes to WoW blue text, like they could mean all kinds of different activities.
Yes. So, I got to see how this feels. Like, to me, this is just one of those changes where you're like, all right, until I actually experience how this is going to feel for me, I just don't know. But I dislike when I see something going from weekly to daily. I feel like that just alienates a large group of players, and it's unfortunate when they talk so much about catch-up mechanics in the game that doing something like this creates a problem versus solving a problem. But
yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on what the rewards for like the weekly wrapper are and stuff like that. if you can move through the renown system for, your faction of choice at a reasonable pace, just doing the weeklies, then I think it's okay. And then if you want to go a bit deeper, then you can. I think it's okay to have that. And I mean, one of the things about Shadowlands, especially in 9.0 season 1, was that like it really felt like the outdoor world content, like solo player stuff, was mostly kind of pointless. It was very de-emphasized, right? Like once you got through the Covenant campaign and once you got your renown up, then it was like, well, I can farm anima for cosmetics, and I can do the maw grind for, a very long tail grind to get a socket item, and I can repeat that like every couple weeks to socket an item. But like, I know like one other person that did that other than me. So I don't know. It's tough to find a happy medium where there's like enough stuff in the outdoor world to keep people who want to play and want to put some time in every day, like busy and feeling like there's, it's worth doing and playing their character, versus like letting people who don't want to or can't do that like fall behind. So it's hard. Like we don't have any kind of basis for comparison for this because we haven't really played around with these systems. So it's hard to kind of gauge. I think as long as the weekly represents like the biggest chunk of progress that you're making, then that's probably good. Like that's probably the way to do it is pack as much progression as you can into the weekly wrapper, and then let people, dink around with smaller yield stuff if they want to.
Yeah, I would only take issue with this if the daily quest resulted in a 100% gain over the weekly quest, right? Like literally if you do the daily quest every day, you complete it twice as fast as someone who doesn't. That to me is where you start drifting into this realm, right? You don't want it to be rares inside of the season 3 thing where people are like, oh, I kill a rare and I get 20 experience or 45 experience, or not experience, or reputation. That people are like, oh, well, it's like you can kill the rares and you can get some reputation, and that's kind of nice. You don't want them to be that weak,
right?
But you want those quests to also not be something where it's like, yeah, I will be able to complete this 50% or 100% faster than you can. That's like, ugh.
Yeah, and I think that is to Bornak's point about why they increased the reputation per renown rank,
right?
Because then they can get more granular with rewards that like feel good to get. You're not giving out like 15 reputation for anything, right?
Right.
And you can give like a big chunk of it for a big thing like a weekly, and you can give a smaller chunk of it that isn't like totally insignificant, not like single digits of rep or something for doing an activity. So, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, that's what I kind of want to see out of this. I think like without having like particulars in front of us, this seems to be like what Bornak's getting at with sort of the intent behind these changes. So we'll see how it feels in practice.
Yeah. All right. As far as development notes for beta, Professions crafted recipes now have a more representative quality difficulty. Feedback on the difficulty of achieving a certain quality for a given piece of crafted gear is very welcome. In mining, in this week's build, they've updated a large majority of mining nodes that were previously inaccessible. If you're a miner, please let us know how the current state of the node density feels and placement. Yeah, if I don't know how many people experience this, if you place a mining node in a place where you can't reach it or get to it, or it's inside of something, it's a problem. So I'm glad they fixed that one. There's a known issue with minimap tracking of ore, fish, and herbs, and can sometimes not display properly. If this is happening, please disable and enable the tracking to resolve this. So that's just a please turn it off and on again kind of thing there that everyone should give it a shot with, I guess. It's not something I would ever have thought to have tried, so I'm glad they mentioned this, which is kind of the funny thing about it. And then as far as UI goes, they updated the unit frames. They have a target update and a minor mobs update, as well as boss frames. So I'm hoping minor mobs, and I have to test this to get on beta to check it out, is referencing to when you're in a boss encounter and there are ads, that there are frames for these ads. That would be very, very nice to me if that's what they are referencing.
Right, like some kind of summons or something. Yeah, whether it's a boss or whether it's out in the world. Yeah, I haven't experienced this yet, so I don't know exactly what it tracks.
Yes. And then in edit mode, there's a slider that now adjusts the size of unit frames of players, targets, and parties. And they added some Dragonflight credits. So all those people who have their names in the credits, I don't know if you saw all the tweets going out last week, but there are lots of people who are highlighting their names and putting them up on Twitter. in the credits that were out there for people.
Yeah,
so
that's
pretty
awesome.
pretty cool for the devs to be able to check that out and have your name be a part of that history. The slider thing. Go ahead.
I was just going to say sliders. We love sliders and anything we can have a slider on.
Yes.
So very cool to see that come in.
And I don't just love sliders. I love having a lot of range on them. The number one thing that bothered me the most is when they're like, we're going to give you raid frames and you're going to be able to move them around, but you can only make them 20% bigger or smaller. And I'm like, well, this is
right.
What? Let me make them like the size of my cursor if I want, and make them my entire screen if I want. Why is there a problem with this? I should be able to do ridiculous things with this UI, because who knows what I'm doing? Maybe I'm using some sort of scaling, because they also have UI scaling based into the game to scale things down smaller. So I need to be able to go beyond where your default slider goes to be able to make everything bigger. Like, just give people a lot of room on these sliders, because like, who is it helping, really, right? Like what advantage are you getting by making a raid frame the size of your screen? Like, no one gains an advantage in that, right?
Right. Yeah, and especially on like modern displays, I mean,
all sorts of sizes.
WoW's been out for a really long time, and I used to play it on a 4x3 CRT because that's how old it is.
Yep.
And I mean, they've had to do a lot to the UI over the years to support more modern displays. And I mean, the cool thing, I think, is just how much we've seen them work on these features just over the course of beta. I mean, as I keep saying, like, my big hope for this is just like an ongoing knob for them to turn and add improvements to, and just give us different ways to set up the UI however we want it and add different functionality. So it's been cool to see all these elements kind of come together over the course of public testing.
Yeah. All right. So last but not least, Wrath of the Lich King, obviously, Classic is out and live and happening, and they're starting to do their events for it. So there's a couple, it's a couple of esports events that are taking place. The first is the Undying Challenge. While many adventurers have conquered Naxxramas before, few are as fast and efficient as two of the top speedrunning guilds out there. So this is on Firemaw. This is called Progress. EU Firemaw is called Progress as their team. And Space Force, who is on Irenicus on the US, so EU versus US, are going to go head-to-head on October 22nd and 23rd, live on YouTube and Twitch, doing the Undying Challenge, which is going to be pretty cool to see. So if you're someone who's going to dig that, basically these two guilds of level 80 characters, just with limited time and gear, go in and try and speedrun Naxxramas without dying. It's pretty cool. Certainly worth checking out.
Yeah, it should be really interesting to see, because I mean, they don't specify how much time they're going to have to gear up, but like, I guess they're basically like getting template characters and maybe having some kind of window to go get, like, I don't know, do dungeons or something. It doesn't, we don't have details here, but the idea is they're like relatively fresh level 80s, and then they got to try to do the Undying Challenge in Nax, which is nobody dies the entire time in there.
Edge of your seat, biting your fingernails style gameplay for sure.
Yeah, I think this could be really fun to watch. Because
or be really short as someone dies immediately. In
that's true.
teams.
I mean, then what happens? You have to like restart. I mean, maybe they can just restart the whole run or something. I mean, it's like, I assume it's like a tournament realm or whatever. So like because back on live, if you were trying to do the Undying and somebody died, like, you were done for the week.
That was it. Yeah.
I mean, my hope would be they keep the broadcast going until somebody succeeds. But. Yeah, this is a cool way to showcase Wrath rating for like a competitive type of event. I think this will be pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree entirely. The other half of this is the Classic Arena Tournament, which is a huge surprise that they're doing. It's going to be on the November 11th to 13th. It's going to have a big combined prize pool of $100,000. It's coming on YouTube and Twitch. Sign-ups are open until October 28th. So if you're someone who wants to hop in and do this, you basically have to sign up before October 28th. They then have the open qualifiers start on November 5th. Those then take place in November, which then establishes who's going to compete on the 11th and 13th. Basically, keep your eye on the WoW Esports Twitter and YouTube and whatnot, as they'll be sort of promoting this more. And obviously, that'll all be streamed as well from the 11th to 13th. So, yeah, if you're into classic arena tournaments, something that existed to a certain degree back in the Wrath days, but certainly wasn't as televised as this is going to be. And obviously players are much better now than they were then. So this will be interesting to see for some people who want to tune in and watch the PvP stuff. I mean, And we're not getting a BlizzCon in November and end of October, but we are getting lots of other events taking place around Wrath Classic.
Yeah, it's cool. We've actually had like a lot of, WoW esports to close out this last year of Shadowlands and everything, and the ramp up with Wrath Classic now coming out. Because we had the solo shuffle thing, and we had the great push, and now we get these two events going on, leading up to Dragonflight launch. So that's awesome. Really, really cool showcase. And I'll probably check out a little bit of the Undying Challenge. I don't know about Classic Arena. I can barely wrap my head around like Modern Arena. So trying to go back in time is even harder for me.
Yeah, that's where I was a little hesitant too, is I think being able to track what's happening when I don't even remember what existed necessarily for all the classes back then is going to be even that extra level of trying to understand that I don't have at the moment. So we'll see. I might tune in for a bit and just watch and see if it's just like a good time. I'm sure it will be, but the Undying Challenge has me a little bit more interested because I remember specifically boss mechanics and whatnot that people might struggle with. So it'll be
right, like it's Nax. Yeah, I mean, I think if you played Wrath at all, like back in the day, then you probably spent a lot of time in Nax, and if you're playing it now, that's probably one of your goals. And the one thing about the PvP broadcast though is like the casters are usually really good at framing what's going on and what's important. So they do a really great job of putting that stuff forth, and there's obviously a lot fewer players to keep track of. So that's that Arena kind of has that in its favor.
Yeah. All right, with that, we're gonna play a quick sounder for our patrons, and we'll be right back. Hi everyone, I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us to improve on the content we create. Today I'm giving a special shout out to Arajian, Celian, Infark, Kapawi, Mibble the Mighty, Nick, and Shorel. Thank you! This sounder is for you. You can find our Patreon over at patreon.com/thestartingzone. If you're someone who wants to hop in and support the show, we really appreciate it. It helps pay for all of the different, actual funding behind hosting things and paying for sites and all sorts of things. So we're currently moving into art phase for Dragonflight for updating some art assets and whatnot. So it's always helpful, and big thank you to all of our patrons. And our newest patron, Michael A. Thank you so much for hopping in, supporting the show. We appreciate this very much. Just so you patrons know, we'll be hosting the patron episode for those who want to submit questions to us. I think we have 2 questions already in the bag. We'll need a few more questions to sort of get the show off the ground. That's going to be Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to go a little bit earlier this time. Might help some people out. Will certainly help us out a little bit. Make my brain a little bit less mush a little bit later as the night goes on. It's going to be a good time on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to submit questions to that or show up live, you can go to our Discord, thestartingzone.com/Discord. And if you're a patron, you will have your account linked with your Discord and you get a special little role and everything else. If you're someone who's not a big fan of Discord or doesn't like using it or having stuff like that, you can always submit a question through Patreon. If you actually send us a message in Patreon with your question, we'll get that into the show as well. So that's always great. Thank you again to all of our patrons, and looking forward to Friday.
Absolutely. Yeah. Welcome aboard, Michael. Thank you for supporting the show. And support for the show has just been incredible over the years, and it really does help. I mean, we've been doing monster episodes of late, and they're not cheap to host after a while. So it does help us out tremendously to keep the show at a high level and keep it consistent. So thank you all. And really looking forward to talking to patrons and hearing from them what's on their minds. I mean, it's been a whirlwind couple of months for a while, so it's always nice to hear what's going on with them. And patrons, just get your questions in. If you're not able to make the record, just feel free to submit them as early as you think of them. Then we can start compiling them together for Friday.
Yeah. Well, another way to support the show that we really appreciate is 5-star reviews. If you've enjoyed this episode of The Starting Zone, consider heading on over to your iTunes or Apple Podcast. Leave us those 5 stars. They really help us move up those charts, help more people find the show, and we like reading them here. This one comes in from MP Diesel J, entitled The Best Podcast. Says, I was never a podcast listener until I moved to the LA area. Well, see, right there, that explains everything. And had to deal with mind-numbing traffic. Yes, that's exactly where my mind went as well. This has not only made my rides home something I look forward to, but it makes me excited to get home and play WoW. Knowing what needs to be done for the week, I hope you guys see this just so I can hear on the show. Keep up the great work as you both have been. And there's and here's to many more episodes. Well, thank you so much, Diesel. I have been to LA at least 6 times, 7 times, I don't know, something like that now. And every time, it's just flying into the city. I live in Canada, for those who don't know. So flying into LA is an experience to fly over the size of it, and then getting on the highway and actually traveling to Anaheim so that we can, do BlizzCon and whatnot, which is the primary reason I've went. I've also gone to Riot and some other campuses there while I was there. But it's crazy. Traffic is insane. And the fact that like motorcyclists just drive down the center lanes because that's legal to do there is also blows my mind in the middle of traffic. It's like people have a death wish or something. But yeah, so I'm glad we can help that commute a little bit easier. It's a bit of a crazy thing.
Yeah, I have like basically no commute anymore, which really cuts into my podcast listening time. Very disappointing. Now it's like when I'm I don't know, doing chores or something. That's podcast time. So yeah, I get that for sure. But yeah, thanks for writing in. I appreciate it. Glad you're enjoying the show. Welcome aboard. Great to have you. And just thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Yeah. That wraps up episode 545 of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can head on over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or ask a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com or reach out to us on Twitter at The Starting Zone, or, as I mentioned earlier, join our Discord over at thestartingzone.com/Discord. We'll get you in there, and you can start chatting with us in the channel that we have set up for TSE. If you want to get your hands on some TSE gear, so the shirts and mugs and stickers and that sort of stuff, you can find that at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/thestartingzone. And Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
Best place to find me, as always, is over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald. You can also find me streaming WoW on twitch.tv/Shieldwald, usually Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Sundays for raid and dungeon stuff. The schedule's been a little bit all over the place with the stream because of, we're wrapping up in Shadowlands, so Sundays have been getting cut quite a bit lately. But you can check the channel out over there, and we're keeping it going. I'm still going to be doing raid stuff and Keystone stuff throughout the end of the season, so check it out over there.
Nice. If you want to find me, you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpencerHD or over on Twitter at Spencer_Downey. And with that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening and jobs done.